Football season is underway, so now is the perfect time to download FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's free bets back if your first bet doesn't win. Just sign up with promo code BLUEWIRE. FanDuel is great because it has all of your favorite bets, from the money line to point spreads to player props. The app is safe, secure, and easy to use, and you get your winnings paid fast. So sign up today with promo code BLUEWIRE for your no-sweat first bet. Make every moment more this season with FanDuel, the official sportsbook partner of the NFL. 21 plus in select states. First online real money wager only. Refund issued as non-withdrawable free bets that expire in 14 days. Restrictions apply. See terms at sportsbook.fanduel.com. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER or visit fanduel.com/RG in Colorado, Iowa, Michigan, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Illinois, or Virginia. 1-800-NEXT-STEP or text NEXT-STEP to 53342 in Arizona. 1-888-789-7777 or visit ccpg.org/chat in Connecticut. 1-800-9-WITH-IT in Indiana. 1-800-522-4700 or visit KS Gambling Help in Kansas. 1-877-770-STOP in Louisiana. 1-877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY 467-369 in New York. The Tennessee Red Line, 1-800-889-9789 in Tennessee, 1-800-522-4700 in Wyoming, or visit www.1800gambler.net in West Virginia.
Hey everyone, welcome to The Final Four is Not on the Schedule. I'm your host Eric, alongside with expert analyst Rod. Thanks for joining us on the best MSU basketball podcast featuring an in-depth recruiting, game matchup, and post-game analysis. We dive deep to give you the best tools to enjoy the Spartans and impress your friends and family. Hey everybody, it's Eric alongside Rod, and well, it's finally happened. It's going to be the rivalry game as Michigan comes into the Breslin Center on January 7th for the first game of the two-game series for the season. And Michigan has been kind of a weird team, and their season's been very strange. They're 9-5, but 3-0 in the league play. They've had a very ho-hum and maybe even lackluster non-conference outcomes where they've played teams well, but not won many of the big games. But they are 3-0 in the league. They beat Maryland, just destroyed Maryland a few days ago. I think Maryland was 1 for 23 to start the game in free throw or field goal percentage. But they just managed to hold off Penn State, and recording this just after that game. They are 28th on offense, only 76th on defense, and their biggest strength, of course, is avoiding turnovers. As usually, they're number 2 in the nation. They've been a decent shooting team, or kind of average, hitting about 35% from 3, which is good for 95th, and 141st in twos. But they're not a good offensive rebounding team, with coming in at 307. I guess, on defense, they've been not so great. They're sitting at 124th in twos and number 100 against threes. And defensive rebounding, they're 117th and don't really generate any turnovers. They've had a tumultuous offseason, as we discussed in the preview, which I'll link to in the show notes as well. Michigan lost Frankie Collins as soon as they signed Llewellyn to come in from, was it Columbia, I believe? And
Princeton.
Princeton. And then,
right league.
Yeah, and then Llewellyn has got an ACL injury, so he's out for the season. And so no Collins and no Llewellyn, and so they've been left with their freshman point guard, Doug McDaniel, who we'll talk about. But it's been a year where I think people expected more from Michigan, and they've I don't know. I mean, I guess I don't know what to make of this team, because they at times look really good, and at times, just a week ago, they lost to Central Michigan at home, just sort of inexplicably. So I don't know what to make of them.
I'm not sure how good they ever look. Honestly, okay. I mean, no, I'm not being cavalier with that. I'll give them, the one game I thought okay, you gotta give them something, was the home game against Virginia, where they came close but lost. But Virginia had a nice start to the season, and they've lost a couple since then. They've kind of come back to earth. I don't think it's a vintage Virginia team. It's not of the caliber. Not only, forget their national championship team. I don't think it's of the caliber of those teams, for example, that Michigan State took out in successive years in the NCAA tournament. I don't think this year's team's at that level. So that was a good result, but a loss. They played Kentucky in London and lost. Kentucky, and this dings Michigan State a little bit too. Kentucky has not been very good this year. Not even close to what I thought they would be.
Yeah.
And then they got beat by North Carolina, and North Carolina has not been anywhere remotely close. So, they were preseason number 1. They've fallen out of the top 25.
Yeah.
So I don't know that the high points are really all that high. That said, Michigan is a team with some capabilities on the offensive end. I think on the right night, they can have meaning that they're hot, and Dickinson is rolling. They can be very good offensively. They can put up points and do so efficiently. But they're a terrible team defensively, and they don't rebound at either end well at all. And I just think there was a good line. I was watching a podcast that the Spartan Mag site did after last night's MSU game, and Paul Conondike had a good word to describe Michigan's entire program, which he used for the players and the head coach. It's immature. It's an immature team. And some of that is to be expected, because the fact is they're young in some spots. Their point guard is a true freshman. Their second leading scorer, Jet Howard, the coach's son, is a freshman. Kobe Buffkin at the 2 guard is a sophomore. And then you got 2 juniors. This is not a team like the one they had in the COVID year, where it was a lot of veterans,
right?
And seniors, 5th-year seniors, juniors, and they played like it. They played like an experienced team. This is not an experienced team. And, Juwan Howard, I mean, come on. Mature is not the first or 500th word that comes to mind.
Yeah.
But, I mean, look, that's just the bottom line. I'm not even attempting to slam the guy. It's just how it is. So when you have an immature team, you're going to have some of this inconsistency in terms of the level that you play at. And I think that's what we've seen from them. Now, I will give them this. Their response to the loss against Central Michigan this week so far, going back to last weekend, where they waxed a Maryland team that just played incomprehensibly awful basketball. That was Maryland was so bad. And no, Michigan didn't have a ton to do with it. I watched that game. God help me, my eyes burning out of their sockets. But I don't know how much credit to give Michigan in that one, other than they actually showed up and Maryland didn't. Tonight against Penn State, I'll give Michigan some credit, because I do think Penn State's a dangerous team. The game was a wild game. I mean, huge runs both ways. One team would go on an 11-0 run, and the other team would come back 14-0, and then the next one would come back 12-0. I mean, it was that kind of game all night long. But unfortunately for Penn State, the way the pendulum was swinging was between big Michigan leads and a tight game. It was never Penn State with a lead or a working margin. I think they had their last lead at maybe 5-6 minutes into the game. So they were constantly fighting uphill. But Michigan played very well offensively. They shot the ball well. They did what they've been doing all year long. And you mentioned the one absolutely positive thing you could say about this team is they don't turn the ball over. And that's a positive development for them because that's something that was obviously a program staple under John Beilein. It has not been a program staple under Juwan Howard. And the fact that it's coming with such a young perimeter group, I mean, 2 freshmen and a sophomore at the 3 perimeter spots, it makes it really impressive. So they're doing something right in that respect. And they did that tonight. They really minimized their mistakes. And that was it. And I thought that, not to dwell too much on that game because it's not really the subject of what we're talking about, but I thought that Penn State didn't do a great job of attacking Michigan the way they needed to be attacked. And we're going to talk about this aspect of things a lot as we get into the preview of Michigan State. But Hunter Dickinson is so bad defensively, and he just can't move. So if they're going to shack coverage and pick and roll, and you get a switch, you've got to be able to attack him. And part of attacking him means either you blow by him or you punish him with open jumpers because you will get them. And I love Pickett, Penn State. He's a great player, and he actually had a very productive game tonight, but it should have been even more productive, in my opinion, because there were a lot of situations where he had Dickinson, could have taken the 15-foot jumper, and for whatever reason, he's just hesitant to pull the trigger.
Yeah.
That hopefully is not going to be the case come Saturday afternoon, because I believe Michigan State has multiple guys that are fully capable of punishing that oaf and making it count. And I do believe that's what you have to do.
Yeah. Now, for our younger listeners, when you say shacking it, it's not S-H-A-C-K, right? It's S-H-A-Q.
Yes, as in Shaquille O'Neal.
Right. And so what exactly does that mean from a defensive standpoint?
Drop coverage. So you have 3 real options, I think. And this is basic. There's more than that, but 3 basic options, let's say, with your big man in pick and roll. Because if you think about how pick and roll works, you've got a guy setting a screen with a ball handler out top. And so hopefully if the screen is good, the guy defending the ball handler is going to be screened off, which is going to leave the screener's man, usually a big man, quite often the center, the 5, having to guard the ball handler, who's usually a guard. That can create a mismatch. If you think back to how great Michigan State was in that phase of the game with Cassius Winston and Xavier Tillman, they just tortured teams with it. So you can play it 3 ways, basically. One way is to do what's called a hard hedge. So sometimes you will see that big man come out very aggressively against the guard, against the ball handler off the screen, and really try to ride him into a position where he has to give the ball up. You can do that if you've got a really good defensive player as a big man who can move their feet. Xavier Tillman, for example. Hunter Dickinson is not within solar systems of being that kind of defender.
Yeah.
A second way you can do it is what's called feathering, which is really not quite the aggressive hard hedge, but you're trying to just deny that guard the ability to penetrate. You're kind of trying to feather it out toward the sideline. And again, hopefully the goal is you're forcing him to give the ball up. He's not getting a shot opportunity out of it. The third way, which is what Michigan usually does, is called drop coverage or shacking, as in Shaquille O'Neal. The Shaquille O'Neal that played for the Lakers, so not the early Shaquille O'Neal where he was ultra athletic, but the later one, he could move. So the Lakers would just drop him in pick and roll coverage and essentially dare a guard to shoot, And if you're playing against a team with a guard who isn't comfortable taking the shots that are there, which are often, 15 to 18 foot mid-range shots, That could be a successful way to play it. Michigan really has no choice but to do that. Hunter Dickinson against Michigan State, we have seen it go both ways. If you go back to the COVID year and the game late in the season at Breslin, Rocket Watts had probably the biggest game of his MSU career by doing exactly what I was just describing, nailing 15 to 18 foot jumpers just inside the arc because Dickinson couldn't cover it. And the shots were there for Rock, and he hit enough of them that it ended up being a serious contributor to Michigan State getting a win. Last year, the game at Breslin, my recollection is they tried to be a little more aggressive with Dickinson because I just remember a steady diet of A.J. Hoggard blowing by him.
Yeah, I agree.
For layups. So that didn't work. The return game in Ann Arbor, they shacked him. He was drop coverage. And I've talked about it here several times.
Yeah.
I don't know why I choose to remember this horrible night, but I was in the stands at Chrysler just screaming for Tyson Walker to pull the trigger on those shots, and he would not do it.
Yeah.
I don't think that's going to be a problem on Saturday afternoon. But so we've seen both ends of how it can go with Dickinson, but I think I'd be very surprised if they tried to play it any other way. If they come out and hard hedge, fantastic. I'd love to see them do that. I don't think they'll be that stupid. So, because if they do, they've got no chance. Dickinson can't hang with MSU's guards. They'll kill him. Just go taking him to the rim.
Yeah, Ray, they'll just dribble right around him and head towards.
Yeah, they'll just blow
lane.
by him and get to the rim and finish. Yeah, it'll be a steady diet of that. So I don't think Michigan's likely to do that. I think they're more likely to go with what they usually do, which is drop coverage. They also will mix in some occasional zone. I was watching it tonight against Penn State. It's one of these kind of morphing things, but it mostly looked like a 2-3 to me. Mm-hmm. I would not be surprised to see them bust that out for a few possessions. So Michigan State will have to attack that adequately, but I don't think you really want to zone Michigan State very much. I wouldn't if I was playing them. They pass the ball too well and they shoot it too well. But most of the time, I think they'll be in man. Michigan State will try to get them in a lot of pick and roll action. And I think it's going to come down to MSU's guards being willing and able to take and make those mid-range shots because they are going to be there. Bet the house on it.
So why don't we go through the starters? I think that might be the best place to go talk. So we've talked about a few of the players already, but maybe we'll go deeper into who Michigan has, and then we'll kind of we'll go through the keys of the game and then discuss the game more overall. First starter would be Doug McDaniel. He's the one we talked about before. He's a 5'11" freshman. He's been thrown into point guard duties. He wasn't expected to do this once the Collins Llewellyn left. He's the guy now. And I thought he's done pretty well, all things considered. He's averaging 6.6 points a game on 38, 33, and 78 shooting. He's a best assist guy, but he's a freshman, so he makes mistakes sometimes. And, defensively, it's a struggle for him, obviously, because he's undersized at 5'11" in the Big Ten.
Yeah, and he hasn't yet learned how to make his speed an asset enough, and he gets lost a lot. So he's not a good defensive player. I think offensively, and I know I talked about this on the Spartan Mag board when Llewellyn went down, that this might be a blessing in disguise for them because they were going nowhere fast with Llewellyn. I do think they are better offensively with McDaniel out there. Not that he's ready for prime time in some ways, but they do look more coherent. And I don't think that's an accident. He's very fast and he's actually pretty good. The thing you've really got to worry about with him is he's got the mid-range floater that he can go to with some regularity, and he really does tend to hit those. I saw him hit one tonight against Penn State, and he can get into the lane with his speed. His shot looks awful. He's hit it. I mean, just his form, but he's hit it at a respectable enough rate that you don't want to completely ignore him as a shooter. But honestly, if he wants to take threes, I think you let him. He's basically somewhere around, I would say, the best of Xavier Simpson as a 3-point shooter. If you remember, there was a point in time later in Simpson's career that he got to be almost on the border of being okay as a 3-point shooter. Yeah. And that's about where McDaniel is now. He'll probably get better as he goes, but I actually do think he's got the makings of a good enough point guard down the line. But right now they're just trying to survive it. And he's been okay. I think let's put it this way. I don't think they could have reasonably expected him to do much better.
Yeah, right.
Than he's done. The one thing about him, I'll give him this. He does not make a lot of mistakes, although he is more mistake prone than their other players. Because again, this team really takes good care of the ball. But I do think at times it's not so much that he might make a play that leads to a turnover. It's that he doesn't get them into an optimal shot opportunity, and there is a difference there. And so sometimes he'll get into that kind of mode. And that's where you notice it, that, all right, this guy's a freshman, probably not ready for prime time, but they don't really have a choice. So they'll go with him.
Next would be Kobe Buffkin, 6'4" sophomore. And he's, I guess, serving as a backup point guard for when McDaniel's not running the show. He's been a very good offensive player this year. And he was one who was recruited pretty decently by Michigan State, ended up taking Jaden Akins over him. So he's averaging a little over 12 points a game on 47, 33, and 82 shooting. And he's struggling on defense like the rest of the team, but doing pretty well for his second year, especially after his struggles last season.
He's also actually been their best playmaker. He's a tight second behind I shouldn't say that. He and Jet Howard are actually two really good playmakers for them on the wings. They don't make a lot of mistakes, and they actually can create for others. Buffkin had kind of a slow start this year. That 33% from three is a little bit misleading, because I would actually say when you're playing him right now, he's a better shooter than that number suggests. He's really taken off over the last, maybe month or so. The first few weeks of the season, he was struggling a lot, like he did during his freshman season, to be quite honest. But I'm not surprised. I really thought in high school, there were three guys in state that were all really very similar level of players, in my opinion. It was him, Jaden Akins, there was Pierre Brooks. Not that they were all the same guy, but they were all essentially wings. And I didn't think that at that point there was a lot to separate them. I think in some ways he really is their Jaden Akins type. Now, he's not the defensive player, Jaden Akins is, but he can do a lot of different things offensively. He's got good size, 6'4". He's a good athlete, not quite Jaden's level, but close enough. He kind of reminded me, and this isn't 100% on point comparison, but there were aspects of him in high school that reminded me a little bit of Gary Harris. He's not as strong as Gary was, and he's certainly not the defensive player Gary was. But I just mean the ability to score in lots of different ways. He can take and make threes. He can go off the dribble, finish at the rim. He can hit the mid-range shot. He's a good enough ball handler, and he's athletic enough that he can create space for his own shot. And he's really been doing those things with much more regularity. So his emergence has been really important for Michigan, because before that happened, they were really a two-man show offensively. He's the third guy, and that is important to have, where they can pretty much every night count on him being in double digits.
Next would be Jet Howard, 6'8" freshman. He's obviously the son of Coach Juwan Howard, averaging 14.6 points a game on 45, 37, and 74 shooting. He's been very good, 36 assists to just 13 turnovers. Surprisingly, not really rebounding much, but defensively not good. but he's been doing well offensively, and he can hit the long shot pretty well.
He's a tough cover. Now his 3-point percentage has come down in recent weeks a little bit, but it's still healthy. And look, he's a guy who any given game he could go 5 for 7 from 3. Sure. I mean, in a heartbeat, he could do that. So he's a weapon. You've got to be conscious of him. He's a strong, I mean, 6'8", and he plays on the wing for them, but he's a strong kid too. So he's a load to guard. I will tell you this. I am very, very happy that Michigan State has Malik Call back in the lineup, because if MSU didn't have Malik, they really wouldn't have a particularly good physical matchup for Jet Howard. You know, Pierre Brooks has the necessary size and strength, but maybe not the foot speed you want. Every other option, maybe a little bit smaller than you want. Malik Call can actually match him physically, but that creates a problem for most opponents trying to deal with him. What I don't understand is his father was, obviously they're different players. His dad was a little bigger than him, certainly played a different position. But Juwan Howard, whatever one wants to say about him, was a very good rebounder and a very, very good defensive player. And his son is neither of those things. And I really have a hard time understanding how it could be as bad as it is with that guy as your dad and your coach. I really don't get it. Like, I would think just by virtue of growing up in that house, he would have had better habits drilled into him. I don't have a good answer for it. It's weird to me. It's not gonna hurt his NBA prospects. He's already showing up at some first round mocks, and I don't know for sure what they're gonna do, but after this season, but I would not be surprised if he left, because I think he's got a reasonably good chance of being a first rounder. And especially for a kid like him, I think the longer he stays around in college, the more likely his game is to get nitpicked. Might make sense to go, but man, he's going to have to figure it out defensively at some point. And the thing is, he's not like a world-beating athlete, but he's not horrible athletically. I don't understand why he's not better, but he is one of the worst wing defenders you will see this year. He's awful. I mean, if he has segments in this game where he's got to guard Jaden Akins or Tyson Walker, even worse, he's going to get scorched, because he can't guard guys like that. But offensively, he's a problem.
All right, next would be Terrence Williams, 6'6" junior. He's now the starting 4-man, second on the team in rebounding, and probably the best defender. But he's not been shooting great, averaging a little under 8 points a game at 7.6. He's shooting 38, 32, and 70. The parts of the game I saw tonight, which was admittedly was not a whole lot, he looked pretty good. Had a couple, I think he had like a couple threes or something, and so he looked pretty good to me.
He had a good game. He hit a 3 tonight. The reason I say it's a downtick from last year he actually shot 38% from 3.
Okay, yeah.
And I think they thought, as a sophomore, and I think they thought, okay, he's rounding into being a real stretch 4 option. And he seems to be, from what I observe, and this is just an anecdotal impression, but he seems to be something of a whipping boy for certain segments of the Michigan fan base. And I think it's, unfortunately for him, I think it's because he actually is pretty much what he was purported to be coming out of high school, which is a guy who can do a lot of things reasonably okay, but he's not going to be great at anything. And he's not great at anything. He's okay. You know, he's the best option they've got at the moment for that position. And they need him because this is a bad rebounding team, as I said, and they desperately need anybody besides Dickinson who can rebound, and he at least gives them that. But, you know, again, the shooting's been a little bit off this year. He's a decent defender, which on a bad defensive team makes you look really good. But he doesn't stand out in any one area. He is kind of a glue guy. That's what you're going to get out of him most of the time.
Well, that's it for. Oh wait, it's not it for starts. There's one left. So 7'1" junior, everyone's favorite here at Michigan State, Hunter Dickinson. Or probably actually in the Big Ten actually. So we talk about him even when we're not playing. He's averaging 18.7 points a game, 8.3 rebounds a game, shooting 57, 39, and 73. He's not really Luka Garza type, which is I think what they're hoping to get more out of him, like National Play of the Year sort of player. And I don't know if just watching him play, he doesn't strike me as someone who just. The one thing about Luka Garza, that guy left everything on the court every time he played. Like I mean,
Bingo.
Every ounce of his, and I don't feel like Dickinson does that.
No, he doesn't, and that's a big part of the problem. And it's funny. They're both DMV guys. They're both Washington D.C. Catholic League guys, and so it's and both centers, both horrendous defensive players. It's a natural comparison to make. I think for Michigan to be really good, they needed Hunter Dickinson to take that junior year leap that Garza did. If you remember, I'm not even talking about his senior year where he had all the National Player of the Year hype, but the year before that, the year that got wiped out by COVID in the tournament, he went from being a good player his first 2 years at Iowa to a dominant player. And I mean, he was such a big deal that it was a major story when Xavier Tillman bottled him up late in the game. MSU beat Iowa at Breslin in a very competitive game, and X really bottled him up. But that was a big deal because Garza was having a huge year. Yeah. And you're right about, they have the same deficiency, which is they both move as if they're in quicksand. So neither one of them could ever guard anybody, but man, Luka Garza played hard. He tried all the time. And that motor made him just a nightmare to deal with on offense and he was skilled, and Dickinson is skilled too. Dickinson, after last year, he kind of expanded his 3-point game. He's gone backward a little bit with that. He hasn't taken very many. The percentage is okay, but I think he's only attempted 13 on the year. So it's essentially one a game. But, similarities. Garza can hit jumper. And Dickinson's always been able to do that too. He can hit mid-range shots, face you up and score. But what made Garza stand out and what I think elevated him to a National Player of the Year status is that motor. He just never quit. And so as an offensive rebounder, he was incredible. You had to constantly be trying to put a body on him. And even if you did, it might not be enough. Dickinson never challenges you like that. Never. So, look, his production is fine. It's good. You could never really say otherwise. But he's not a great college player right now. And that's what I think Michigan needed him to be. Now we could spend a long time, much, much longer than this dip deserves, talking about the reasons behind that. I think there are some things that if you're paying attention at all are pretty obvious to me. I think first and foremost, I don't even know how much he loves basketball. And I especially don't know how much he loves playing college basketball right now. Without trying to psychoanalyze him, I do wonder, because a lot of times this year, I've looked at him and he has just looked completely disinterested to me. I mean, Michigan fans will say that.
Yeah.
So it's not just me, with an anti-University of Michigan bias coming at it. I think Michigan fans will admit to that. And I think that's got something to do with it too. Luka Garza never looked anything less than supremely motivated.
Yeah.
Right? So
yeah, no question.
I think that's the deal. Look, Hunter Dickinson, obviously, because of his size and his skills, can do a lot of damage. But he also has some real deficiencies, primarily on the defensive end. He is a liability. The question coming into any game when you are an opponent of Michigan is, can you take sufficient advantage of his liabilities? Because they are there, they are manifest, and you will have opportunities, if you are looking for them, to exploit it.
Yeah. And I think the other thing with Dickinson, I mean, the obvious thing, of course, is he's been on a lot of podcasts. His attitude or his persona, I don't know the right word to capture it. Really, his character, maybe.
That's
is
a good one
of,
because I think it's forced.
Yeah, it seems like he wants to be the villain. He's kind of goes out of his way. Yeah, and
he said it this year.
It's very strange. I would say too with a team that doesn't have any seniors. Well, I guess it has a grad transfer, but it doesn't have any seniors. They have when you look for leadership. I mean, he would be your natural leader for the team, just sort of steady the ship and sort of be the the voice of reason. And he's anything but. And I think they're going to win games and such, but I think it's going to be a problem for them because I don't know. I mean, to your point, I don't know if he's not interested in playing basketball, but he's certainly not 100% focused on his team, and that seems to be pretty apparent to me. And it's just it'd be frustrating if I was on the team. You have a guy who's just kind of going off about stuff. What I found most interesting about it, though, is that I would assume if anyone did that on Michigan State, it would last like a day, right? And then that part is over. At least, what happens behind closed doors happens behind closed doors, and we don't know about it. Maybe we hear about it, sort of. But what he does publicly, I mean, just wouldn't be tolerated at almost any school. It's really kind of bizarre to me that you have a guy who's on podcasts or whatever and talking about, calling Wisconsin Badgers scumbags or whatever. I mean, just kind of crazy stuff. Like, why would you allow that to happen? I don't get it.
There's a number of different ways to come at this. One thing is you'd say, well, Hunter Dickinson is making NIL money for that podcast. It's a Barstool affiliated with podcast, which is just on point branding that you would have if anybody's had the misfortune of watching this thing. I was really unaware of it until a few weeks ago when he popped off about Michigan State and the safety school nonsense.
Yeah.
The production values are it's like a GeoCities site in 1999. It's
public access.
bad news. Yeah, it's really rough. But he is presumably making money by doing this. So I suppose if Michigan really wanted to defend this, you could say, well, look, our athletes have these opportunities to make money and we don't want to stand in their way. And that wouldn't wash for me, but that's an argument. The thing is, it's an indictment as much as anything else. It's an indictment of the media that covers the University of Michigan's athletic programs, in that, to my knowledge, Hunter Dickinson hasn't been asked about this. Juwan Howard hasn't been asked about this. This has been news now for several weeks running. The kid can't shut his mouth.
Yeah.
And he's doing this in a way that now you're having, Michigan State's play, you're 100% right about what would happen in Michigan State's program if anybody was that stupid. Sam Decker from X of Wisconsin, after the scumbag comments I saw the other day, maybe it was even today or yesterday, made a comment about how Bo Ryan would have acted so fast their heads would have spun if he'd ever caught them doing something like that. You're right. It's true of most programs. Most programs would absolutely lower the boom if they had a kid doing the things that he does. But this is the thing that I think is ultimately true about him. And I expect that this is what we're going to see on Saturday. Hunter Dickinson claims that a part of this is he wants opposing fans to be angry at him.
Mm-hmm.
There are certain guys who thrive under that circumstance. Not a lot of them, I'll note, but there are certain guys. Scott Skiles, to me, in Michigan State history, was the ultimate example of this. His senior year, because of the negative publicity he got, and the fact that he was a slow 6'1" white point guard, made him a target for every fan base around the Big Ten. People hated him. I mean, they were out for blood in every arena he played in. But that guy truly used that as fuel. It made him better. You know, Antoine Gilbert pops off in the press before the game at Chrysler. Skiles comes out famously at center court for the tip, turns to him and says, "You better lose 20 pounds before you try to guard me, fat boy," and then torches him. There are guys like that. Much as I dislike Michael Jordan and think he's a punk, and on and I'd go on for days about him. But one thing I'll give him is Michael Jordan was a guy who thrived. Not that he got booed as much as he should have, but maybe a better example would be the Bad Boys.
Bill
the
Laimbeer.
Pistons thrived on that. Isaiah Thomas thrived on that. Bill Laimbeer used it as his life's blood.
Yeah.
There are not many guys who can do that. And I have not seen any evidence that Hunter Dickinson is the exception to the rule and is one of those guys that truly will use a crowd's hatred as fuel to inspire them to even greater play than they would normally be capable of producing. I see no evidence of that to date. And we're going to find out on Saturday, because even though it's a game in the afternoon, I expect that to be for a variety of reasons. And he's one of the reasons, not the only one. I think that's going to be as hostile a building as he's ever been in his life. And I think it's going to be one of the most hostile buildings we've seen for a Michigan State game in a long time. I'm going to be surprised if it's not the most live that building's been since the 2012-13 season. If you remember that game, Michigan and Indiana had all the hype that year. Both programs are back, all that nonsense. And Michigan State was just being a typically great Michigan State team, kind of flying under the radar, got a pumped up Michigan team at Breslin and ripped their hearts out, just wrecked them. And I don't know that I've ever been in a building that was as live as that one was that day for a Michigan State game. It was crazy how intense it was. I think this one's got a chance to be more intense. We'll see.
Yeah. I would just say, when it comes to Hunter Dickinson, last thing, I feel like, especially in the social media era, which is what we're in, right? And Twitter and driving clicks. And, I think people will, again, get these personas as the villains, and his actions, what he says, everything he does seems to be directed towards increasing visibility. It's sort of like the all publicity is good publicity. And I don't know that that's entirely the case, because what happens oftentimes to these folks is they'll burn themselves out. Because you can only kind of sort of clown around so much and people just get tired of you. And so I think that'll ultimately be his risk at some point. But I think that's what drives a lot of his behavior.
Oh, I think you're absolutely right. But I also think, besides the risk of burnout on that, you have to back it up.
Oh, yeah, sure. Absolutely.
Christian Laettner, one of the biggest polls in the history of the sport. But Christian Laettner backed it up over and over and over. Duke's had a lot of guys like that. Grayson Allen, as much as he was a villain, Grayson Allen backed it up more often than not on the floor, Yeah. Draymond Green. Draymond Green backs it up. He's got the rings to prove it. Hunter Dickinson has never struck me as a guy who's been really capable of doing that. So, he's a productive player, but as we just got done talking about, there was a pretty clear challenge, I think, in front of that guy coming into this year. Can you be a guy who goes for like 25 and 12 every night, which is what somebody like Garza did a couple of years ago? Can you be that kind of player? And he hasn't been. He hasn't been close. So I think it's going to be a long afternoon for Hunter Dickinson, but we'll see.
Yeah, I hope that's the case. All right, well, let's move on to the reserves briefly. So first is Joey Baker, 6'7" grad transfer from Duke, averaging 4.9 points a game on 41, 51, and 68 shooting. He definitely looked good tonight. He had a number of good plays, and again, just a portion that I was watching. So
he was like 3 for 5 from 3.
Yeah, so he looked pretty good from that end.
Look, here's the deal with Joey Baker. He's been a good addition in the sense that he's definitely shooting the best he's ever shot. He came into Duke with a reputation as a big time shooter. And he was a good shooter there, but he was never a great one. He's been really, really good for Michigan thus far. But that's all he gives you. So if he's not producing from three, you're not getting anything out of him because he doesn't do anything else. So he truly is a designated shooter. And you look at that point average, he's not taking a ton of them. He's not getting a lot of shots up.
Right.
You know, but I do think if you're Michigan State, when Joey Baker's on the floor, that's a guy you got to guard. You can't let him get open looks because he's certainly proven capable of burying them this season.
Next is Terrace Reed, the backup for Dickinson, 6'10" freshman. Looked okay at times today too. He's averaging 5 points a game and 56% from the floor, grabbing 2.5 rebounds a game. Backhand a free throw, much like Derek Walker, last game with Nebraska.
Yeah, but he's even worse because Derek Walker had a bad night. Derek Walker, I think, came into that game shooting in the 50s, and he had just a really awful night, but he's not that bad. Terrace Reed is bad, 26%.
He's worse than me, Rod. He said 40%.
Right, you were 40, right? Yeah. Look, he's a kid I do think has potential. Michigan State recruited him. He was a guy they recruited, and when they didn't get him, that's when they turned to Jackson Kohler. That's how that unfolded. I do think Reed has potential. He's got a Big Ten size body right now, so strength is not an issue. If anything, I think he probably has got to work a little bit on just toning up. But and he's reasonably skilled in the post. What is he? 56%, I think, 57% from the floor.
Yeah.
So, he can finish okay. And as far as a backup in the Big Ten goes, you could do a lot worse, even though he's a freshman. I think he gives you someone who at least is bringing size to the table behind Dickinson and can occasionally go out and get you a bucket or two. Defensively, he too struggles because he's not particularly mobile. But he does have some wingspan. He can give you an occasional bit of rim protection. Again, long term, I think he's got a chance to be a pretty solid player. For this year, he's given them what they need, which is a guy you can use for 10, 12 minutes a night and get reasonable production out of.
Next will be Will Shutter, a 6'8", 240-pound redshirt freshman, averaging 2 points a game on 40, 17, and 75 shooting. He didn't even play against Penn State, though, so hard to know how much.
Yeah, but he had been playing more recently, which was weird. The only thing I can figure is they must have felt, because Penn State is such an undersized team,
right,
that it didn't make sense to play him. But he has been playing more, and against a Michigan State, I wouldn't be surprised to see him see the floor. He came in with a rep as a stretch four guy, and the 3-point shooting has eluded him to date this year, but they do like him as kind of a hard-working guy, kind of a glue guy type. He just hasn't dialed in the jumper yet.
Next is Juwan Howard's older son, Jace Howard, 6'6", junior, averaging 1.5 points a game on 54, 67, and 50 shooting. Obviously, he's not somebody who's getting high volumes of shots, and he's only averaging 1.5 points a game.
Yeah, he's a guy, we talked about them, and I would stand by this. It's an immature team. But he's a guy, his third year in the program, and he struck me as kind of a level-headed kid. I think that he's probably the best they've got in terms of injecting a little bit of that. He's also one of their better defensive players, which again makes it an even bigger mystery to me why his more talented brother can't guard anybody. Because he can. He's okay.
Maybe that's why Jet's so good, because he had to try and get around Jace and score on him. Finally, Isaiah Barnes, 6'7", redshirt freshman, averaging 1.4 points a game on 40, 33, and 80 shooting in limited volume and minutes.
Yeah, he along with Shutter has started to play a little bit more of late. I think they're trying to lengthen their rotation a little bit. Only played 3 minutes tonight. Very athletic kid and good size on the wing at 6'7". Just hasn't really put it all together yet. And again, as is the case with a lot of these guys, it's not even so much that he lacks physical tools to be able to defend. It's that he just doesn't have any idea. He gets lost. So, you look at his body and his physical tools and you think, oh, that's a guy, who could maybe be a very good defensive player for you, versatile, but it has not emerged as of yet.
Well, and this is not surprising, right? You have freshmen, you have people who are, well, you have all underclassmen for the most part in your team. And if you don't have the veterans running the show and kind of putting people, making sure people in the right places, you can have a very bad defensive effort. Even when people maybe are good defenders, maybe individually, as a team defense, maybe lacking. And so I don't know. I mean, I wonder if that's part of the problem with Michigan too, that you have a guy who can't move in Dickinson surrounded by people who are inexperienced and, maybe have lack of focus in some ways.
Well, I think it's 100. I think it's 100% the case. Absolutely, you have a void, and that's a problem. I mean, to some extent, that's what we saw at Michigan State the last couple of years. Is you didn't have that group of players who had the right, and that's not to bag on those kids. I think I like Gabe Brown, I like Marcus Bingham. But those guys were not really leader material in the way that you need someone to be. And when you don't have that, and again, it doesn't always have to be a Mateen Cleaves or Travis Walton. It could be a Cassius Winston. It could be a Xavier Tillman that are a little quieter, but they're going to keep everybody in line and they're going to hold the bar high in terms of what they expect out of their teammates. And they're going to do the right thing themselves, and if you don't have that, it can be tough.
All right, well, we'll step away for just a moment, and we'll be right back with the keys to the game.
2022 has been a busy year at Blue Wire. With over 40 basketball shows, the network has everyone covered from national to team-specific NBA pods. To wrap up 2022, Blue Wire has curated Blue Wire Buckets, an end-of-year playlist that features our top podcasters' top NBA interviews with some of the biggest names in basketball covered, including star players, decision-making executives, and more. Specifically, we've got Klay Thompson, Tyrese Halliburton, Jeremy Lin, D'Angelo Russell, Blazers GM Joe Cronin, Duncan Robinson, and more. Listen and follow Blue Wire Buckets on Apple, Spotify, and wherever you get your podcasts.
All right, I feel like the keys of the game are a bit of a riddle. The first one is 15 to 18 feet.
Yeah,
you're obviously referring to jumpers.
It's really simple. And in the last two games, I've seen these wins, Maryland and Penn State. I did not feel that those teams took advantage of the big gaping hole opportunity that Michigan gives you, which is pick and roll defense. Hunter Dickinson can't get out and guard you. I'm not sure what was going on with Maryland. They just didn't even seem interested in attacking it. Penn State got it a lot. They got that switch a lot. But as I mentioned, Pickett is not a terrible jump shooter statistically, but he must not have much confidence in that mid-range game because he had ample opportunity to take shots against Dickinson when he would get those switches. And instead he would dribble, try to blow past him. And the other thing is, he's a very good player around the rim, as you see when you watch him, but he's not the kind of straight line blow by guy that a Tyson Walker is, or he doesn't have the same knack for it that AJ Hoggard has. He's kind of a slowly work his way into the spot he wants to be and back you down kind of player around the rim. So consequently, Michigan was not made to pay as much as I think they should have been by what Penn State did. Michigan State has to exploit that. It will be there all afternoon long. I guarantee it. So Tyson Walker in pick and roll has to be putting that guy in a torture chamber. He has to. AJ Hoggard, we've seen him hit the mid-range shot. He's got to be able to do that. Jaden Akins may get his chances. He's got to be willing to do it. Maybe even Trey Holloman some. Michigan State's got guys who are capable of hitting that shot. They have to be willing to take it, and they have to make it. Do that, and it opens up so much else.
Sure. And I thought, like, tonight, watching the Penn State and Jalen Pickett attack, I mean, he had the three-point shot anytime he wanted it with Dickinson. Yep. And he turned him down. He was 2 for 2 for the game. It was kind of weird. I guess.
Yeah, and he's and on the season, he's a good shooter in terms of his efficiency. The problem is, if you notice, his volume isn't super high. So he, for whatever reason, he's hesitant to pull the trigger. Michigan State should not be. There's no reason. And in fact, I did see Penn State as the game went on. They tried to adjust to that by at times moving Pickett off the ball and letting other guys run it. But the problem with that for them is he's always their best creator. So you don't really want to take him off the ball. Michigan State doesn't have these conundrums. Their guys are the right guys for this. They've just got to be willing to take the shot. And obviously they got to make them. If they go out and Tyson Walker goes 2 for 9 from 3, well, that's going to be a problem. You got to make the shots.
You look at Michigan State at Chrysler, as you said, you were yelling at Walker to shoot. He had that all day long, and for that matter, so did Hoggard. And Hoggard knew he shouldn't take it because he couldn't make him last year.
Hoggard didn't play a lot in that game. Hoggard was banged up, and that was another thing that hurt MSU. Yeah. But it's a different package this year, and the difference, I think, starts with Tyson Walker's aggressiveness and confidence.
And you got to feel better about that after watching the last few games. Well, in this whole season, he's just a different player for sure.
So I don't think we'll see a rerun of what happened at Chrysler.
Right. Well, if nothing else, we're just missing those shots and maybe getting some rebounds. So number 2, guarding the arc.
Yeah, I'm going to be interested to see how Michigan State approaches this. But if it were me, I would largely employ the defense that they've used to some level of success against teams with very, very big post players in the past. And that means largely, not exclusively, but largely letting Dickinson go one-on-one. Mm-hmm. I figure Dickinson's going to get his points. The key is Michigan's not a great three-point shooting team, but they're good enough that if you allow Dickinson the opportunity to pass out of doubles and find wide open shooters, you could turn them into a good shooting team.
Right.
So to me, I would be emphasizing locking those guys down on the perimeter, letting Dickinson go one-on-one. Now, look, there's some risks inherent in this. One big one is what happens if Mahdi picks up a couple quick fouls.
Right, exactly. That's what I was thinking, yeah.
Could happen. But I think that, look, that's a risk in any game, and it's going to be a risk constantly this Big Ten season because you've got nothing but capable big men. What you have to hope for is that you get an officiating crew, much like the one MSU had yesterday, where they let them play. They let the big guys go at it. Or hope that Dickinson makes some mistakes and gets a couple cheap fouls, which is entirely possible because, again, the atmosphere is going to be one that I think a lot of things potentially could conspire to get him doing some stupid things. I think that's very possible. But again, to me, the key is you don't turn Michigan into a good three-point shooting team.
Right.
If you do that, you keep them down in that area of the game. Let Hunter Dickinson do what he does.
Right. And if you keep him outside, you don't give him anything open, like wide open, he's not going to dribble past you very often. So, he may slowly try and back you down.
I do think there's room for on occasion, and I do think what Michigan State will do is on occasion, they might send somebody. Like, for example, if you've got whoever's guarding McDaniel, you could send.
Sure.
Either on a dig or just on a quick double. You could get away with that and dare them to, but it matters who's coming if they're going to do that. What you don't want to do is you don't want to have the guy, you don't want Malik Hall doing it and leaving Jet Howard wide open. Or you don't want Jaden Akins doing it and leaving Kobe Buffkin open.
Right.
Right. You have to be selective, and I think Michigan State will do some of that just to mix it up and keep him off balance. But for the most part, I think the key is you lock in on that arc.
Yep. That's sort of like similar to playing at Purdue in the past, right?
Absolutely.
Same
strategy.
Absolutely. So number 3 key, transition. Transition game's been looking a little better the last few games, and is now we've got more bodies back. And so, can you, how much can you use against a poor defensive team, and how much can you get out of that is, obviously the more it's what you hope for.
I'm not expecting a track meet by any means, but I do think we're talking about a young team, an immature team. I would think, and Michigan State, conversely, maybe being a little more insistent and consistent with the way that they're looking to push. I would like to think they're going to have some opportunities here to get into transition and make some things happen. What they probably won't have are any of those, as Izzo calls them, those pick sixes for touchdowns, because Michigan has done, as we talked about, a very good job of taking care of the ball. So you wouldn't expect that Michigan State's going to have a lot of steals. But if they do, that could be another way they get into it. I'm just not counting on that.
Yeah.
I think it's going to be the more conventional defensive rebound and go, off a made basket and go. It's going to be that type of thing.
Speaking of glass and rebounding. So Michigan's not a good rebounding team on either end of the floor. And, Michigan State has been much better defensively, showed a little bit of signs of life against Nebraska offensively. Can they extend that on and punish Michigan on the glass? I mean, that's, I guess, that's not even just even for this game. That's sort of going forward. So this is another way of building some good habits for later.
Is Nebraska a blip on the screen in terms of offensive rebounding, or is it a sign that as Malik Hall rounds into shape, as maybe Jackson Kohler's giving you a little bit more, those types of things are happening. Jaden Akins is feeling better. Do we see an uptick on the offensive glass? That would be a welcome sign. It doesn't even have to be 14 offensive rebounds as it was against Nebraska. Just better than what we've seen, getting some real second chance opportunities. At the other end, I would be very surprised to see Michigan do much, because they're sub 300 now in offensive rebounding rate. I mean, they're really not trying to do anything. And Michigan State's been pretty good on the defensive glass. So if Michigan does make hay as an offensive rebounding group, that's a problem.
And then number 5 key, the one maybe it's not at all surprising, and especially I feel like this year, after what happened with the football team in the tunnel, with all the shenanigans from Hunter Dickinson on social media, there's going to be a whole lot of emotion. Like you said earlier, this is going to be a very intense game. It's the game my wife looks forward to the least, because we happen to have our seats near where the maze craze, or whatever those guys are called, who come and the students sit up in the back. So they're only about 4 sections away from us, so we hear all their chanting and cheering and all their stuff they're saying. So it drives her crazy.
All 15 of them?
Well, I'd say they bring about 60. I mean, there's a good contingent. They're loud.
60. I think this is important, because it's easy sometimes to let the thing become bigger than it needs to be. And this is something that even Tom Izzo talked about this. He said early in his career, he had so much emotion poured into beating Michigan. And he had to learn, not that it ever is anything but mattering a great deal, but he had to learn how to properly channel it. And I think for the most part over the years, Michigan State teams have done a pretty good job of managing emotion in this game. I do think this one's going to be a little different. And I mean, we're recording this on Wednesday night. Hunter Dickinson has, another 50 some hours to run his mouth. Who the hell knows what other stupid he's going to say? I almost kind of expect it. But I think that from Michigan State's point of view, what matters is using that energy in the building as fuel for yourself and not getting caught up in anything else. That's what really matters. You've got to go out and you got to play the game calmly, and sometimes that can be hard to do in a rivalry game. But I like Michigan State's chances to do this successfully for a couple reasons. One is this is a mature team, much more mature than Michigan is. Malik Hall, Joey Hauser, AJ Hoggard, even guys like Tyson and Jaden, they've all been through it now. Michigan State has very few guys that are seeing this for the first time. Conversely, Michigan's got a lot of guys that are going to be in this for the first time and have no clue what's coming. So I think this is really important. But again, I have a reasonable amount of faith that Michigan State will navigate it well, because historically they've done a pretty good job of it.
Yeah, and I think it's definitely the kind of game you could see huge runs happening in, right? I mean, you can just see Michigan, and especially someone like Hunter Dickinson, getting frustrated, and having trouble with a couple of turn the ball over or taking some bad shots or something. The thing you worry about, of course, is that you can also, to your point, that you get overwhelmed with emotion and you start going for that offensive rebound that you don't have a chance for. Now Madi picks up a second foul 6 minutes into the first half.
You start playing outside of yourself.
You
You try to do too much because you're allowing emotion to overtake, discretion being the better part of valor, right? So that's what you need to avoid. I do think in regard to Dickinson, I also want to get this out there. We'll see if I'm right. Well, I'm not going to make a prediction. I'm just going to say, I think there's a reasonably high non-zero probability, if that makes any sense. Let's say it's not 0 and it's not 1 or 2% chance that there is an incident in this game. And I'm saying that because you've got a team that's immature, whose best player has, proven himself to not be a particularly good decision maker. And he's going to be facing, he could talk as much as he wants. He will never have been in a building like this. I mean, let's keep in mind, his freshman year, there wasn't a crowd.
Right. COVID year. Yeah.
Okay. Last year, he got his ass kicked. And he didn't look, he did some things productivity wise, but I remember him being a very frustrated player.
Yes. Yeah.
I don't think that crowd came close to what I'm expecting on Saturday. It's not just about him running his mouth. It's not just about Juwan Howard. It's that football game. I'm telling you, I have a niece who is a senior at Michigan, and I was telling her mother, my sister, she has football season tickets. I don't think she has basketball season tickets, and I don't know that she's ever been to a game at Breslin. But I actually checked in, and I said, tell her if she had any thought of coming down for that one, don't. And I'm not even laughing about that. I really do. And look, you don't, obviously the last thing in the world anybody wants is for anyone affiliated with Michigan State to get into anything, right? And I'm talking about the crowd. I'm not talking about the players. I don't worry about the players. But I also can't blame people for feeling what they feel after what went on after that football game. And that is going to bleed into what that building is like. I'm convinced of it. I think the rivalry has gotten to a very ugly point, and it's not just going to be limited to football. That will bleed into this basketball game. Now, I think that Michigan State, I've got to believe they're going to do everything they can to keep a lid on it within reason, with security and what have you. But I'm telling you, if it was another program, if we were talking about Wisconsin, we were talking about Ohio State, I wouldn't have any concerns. Yeah. But in Michigan, you have a kid in Dickinson who's troubled, in my view, and you could dice that up any way you like, but he's not right in the head. And you got a coach who's had major league problems. Now, are you telling me that there's no chance that a Michigan State fan is going to say something, the right thing, the wrong thing, somewhere in between, at the wrong moment, that could lead a guy who's already had major problems controlling his temper to do something stupid. He did it as a player at Breslin. So why would I think there's no chance? The first 3 times he's been to Breslin, it's been largely without incident. And I think that there was the stupid technical foul he got Cassius' senior year for running out onto the floor that negated a Cassius 3. But,
Right.
And they didn't have fans the second time. And then last year he got his ass whipped. So, we haven't seen a bad moment yet. And I don't think there's any real animus between he and Izzo. I don't think that exists. But this is just a different vibe, man. Like, we got used to the Beeline era where it got hot a couple of times because the teams, the programs were both so good.
Right.
Right. But that's different than this. This is getting back to the raw kind of hate that can lead to some bad things. So I hope that nothing happens. I'm not, much as I dislike their program, I'm not rooting for Juwan Howard to do something that ends his career or for Hunter Dickinson to do something that gets him suspended. But I don't rule it out because I think they're going to be under immense pressure. And I don't think either one of them is likely to be adequately prepared for what that's going to be like. That's my read. Maybe I'll be wrong, but I'm pretty convinced I'm right about that.
Well, I think the one thing I'm fairly confident about is that for Juwan Howard, at least, if not this season, the next season, something will happen where he's going to get something bad's going to happen to him from an anger issue. He just hasn't addressed it, and he's shown it multiple times. It's just a matter of time before something happens that's going to really cause a problem. I don't know what I'd hate for it to be, cause multiple suspensions, but players and things like that. You wouldn't want that.
You see it. You see this coming with people. I, not to toot my own horn, because I think it was really screamingly obvious to anyone paying attention. I called Dan Dakich's career ending a few years ago because I thought it was obvious. You could see it coming. Dakich did not have the ability to control himself, and he was eventually going to say something, do something that was going to cost him his livelihood. And sure enough, that's what's happened. I made a comment about Danny Hurley on the Spartan Mag board about a week ago. They were playing Villanova, and they ended up winning the game. But Danny Hurley got upset at a call in the first half, went ballistic, and could not calm himself down. And I said, I think UConn's got great personnel, and I do believe that, but I'm not sure Danny Hurley's up to the job of getting them over the hump and a long run in March and maybe even to a Final Four and beyond that. And I say that because it's been obvious to me. I go back to the game that they played against Michigan State last year in the Bahamas, where in a tight game down the stretch at winning time, he completely lost his mind, got teed up, but worse than the tee, or just as bad as the tee, couldn't get past it to focus and actually coach his team. He missed the entire huddle screaming at the officials. Tom, and people want to compare. I got a little bit, not much, a little bit of pushback on that. And somebody said, well, Izzo gets angry. I said, yeah, but there's a huge difference. I've never seen Tom Izzo let his anger take him out of what he has to do as a coach. I've never seen it. I've seen it with Danny Hurley, and sure enough, he got teed up in their loss at Xavier at a really inopportune moment, and it tilted the outcome of that game. You're going to see it again with him. He's not done doing stupid shit, because he's unable to control his temper. And I think you're right about Juwan Howard. This is not a one-time incident. It's been several occasions, including moments this year, by the way, where he's been right on the verge of losing it. Something's going to happen, whether it's this weekend or some other point. Something's going to happen, because in this game, you constantly have these moments, these pressure cookers, and eventually he's just going to blow his stack again and do something stupid, and it might cost him his career.
Yeah. You certainly don't hope for that for anybody, but just that they get help and take care of themselves. But yeah, I think it's inevitable. At some point, it's going to happen, and unless he exits college basketball and heads to the NBA before something happens too. So.
I honestly think for a guy like him, I was just thinking about it as we're talking. The NBA, which is mentioned frequently as a possibility for him, probably makes more sense because guys coaches at least, don't tend to lose their minds the way they do in the college game, in part because you're playing 82 games plus the playoffs if you're fortunate. It can be, if you have a long enough run, it could be 100-game season, right? Nobody can stay that hot for 100 games. And it's just the nature of it is very different. Like you just don't see it the way you do in college. And maybe it would be a better fit for him. I don't know.
Well, that's for the future to decide. And right now we have Michigan coming in. Looking forward to the game. I always enjoy these games. There is that, I don't know how you describe it, but there's certainly electricity, right? You actually feel it in the air, and it's going to be one of those games for sure.
Oh, yeah.
Which always makes it great, but also a lot of anxiety. So I would be very happy with the 20, 30-point victory and just like blow them out, like that one game where they beat them by like 50 points with the Mateen Cleaves back in, it was like 2000.
Yeah, that was the all-timer, likely to never be repeated. So for what it's worth, Ken Pom has MSU as a 3-point favorite.
Yeah. And this game too is important in the standings, right? Michigan State is 2-1. Michigan is 3-0. You can argue all you want about who Michigan's played, but Michigan State lost at home to Northwestern. There's no excuse for that. It happened. And you can't afford to lose too many of these games at home. You got to protect home court and then steal some on the road to win the Big Ten.
And with the games that MSU has coming up after this, you really want to bank this
Absolutely.
one. It's important.
Yep. Well, unless you have anything else, I think we'll head on out of here.
I think we've said it all.
Just to find
any of our listeners who are going to be there, obviously you don't want anybody to do anything stupid that puts them in harm's way, but everything short of that, let them hear it.
I would say that I was surprised. So during that free throw competition, I sat down under the basket. I was surprised at how much, I never sit down there. Right. And so I was surprised at how much the fans were ragging on Derek Walker, because he was struggling that first half and yelling at him, and he kind of looked down and stuff. And I guess I didn't realize that that really happened. And so that players could even hear that sort of thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, they can definitely hear that stuff. So it was kind of, it was eye-opening for me anyway. And I'm sure there'll be a ton of that.
Crowd, it needs to be like that 2013 game or other games over the years, but that's the one that always stands out in my mind as kind of the bellwether. Just from the opening tip, just that noise, just taking Michigan out of it and being something that Michigan State can use as energy, as fuel.
Well, the ISZone will be back, which will be helpful. And of course, the alumni ISZone is just as good as the ISZone, I think, personally, if not better, because they just have the one chance. So the ISZone will be back, and we'll be back after the game to go over, hopefully, Michigan State victory. And until next time, the Final Four is on the schedule. Go Green.